good afternoon, and welcome. I am Emily Turner, and I have the privilege of serving as the Associate Director for Prospect Development and Alumni Relations for the Inspired Leadership Initiative at Notre Dame. The ILI is a program for accomplished individuals who have completed their chosen career and come to campus for one academic year to discover, discern, and design their next stage in life. On behalf of the ILI team, I want to thank you all for participating in this installment of our Inspiring Conversation series. During this academic year, we are exploring the theme of leadership and public conversation, where we will hear from leaders from across disciplines and industries, from a variety of age groups, who can speak to current topics that are being discussed in the public sphere today. Today, we're thrilled to explore the topic of bringing purpose to life. We'll do that by welcoming 3 young alumni from Notre Dame who are going to talk about how they have made the conscious decision to move toward purposeful living, not only in their careers, but in their everyday life. We talk a lot about purpose and meaning in the ILI program, so I'm particularly excited to hear the perspectives of 3 individuals who come from different generations from our typical ILI fellows about their pursuit of bringing purpose to life with intentionality. As you'll learn, our guests are not only impressive individuals for their many talents and accomplishments that they've already had in life, but they're also extremely thoughtful, and they have a lot of wisdom to bring to the conversation today. So with that, I'd like to introduce. First, we have Waleed Johnson. Waleed is a 2015 graduate, and he comes from Detroit, Michigan, where he lives with his wife and young son. He's a software engineer and somehow finds time in his life to pursue his passion as a painter. Next, we welcome Renee Yassine, who graduated in 2022. She is a writer and entrepreneur from Indiana, and she currently writes the Washington Post's post-grad column, which is a weekly series dedicated to the experience of young professionals and recent graduates. And oftentimes she writes about things a little bit about what we might be talking about today, too. And finally, we welcome Connell Fagan. Connell is originally from Derry, Northern Ireland, and he graduated in 2021. He's well known on campus, having been the leprechaun during his time here. But more importantly, he's an emerging leader in the disability sector and currently holding the position of fundraising executive at Arthritis Ireland. Again, it's a pleasure to have you 3 with us. I'm so thankful for you taking the time to be here and discuss bringing purpose to life. So let's dive in. I just shared a little bit about each of you, but I really want to hear from you individually about yourself. So can you just briefly share with us a little bit more about your background and maybe a little bit about what it is that you're pursuing in your life or career that you're passionate about? Waleed, do you want to get us started?
Okay, my name is Waleed, and I am a graduate here of the O'Reilly program, which is a really cool program that allows engineers to get 2 bachelor degrees. I started off in computer engineering, and then I was able to add art, which is a passion of mine. From the time I was a kid, I used to draw all the time. For my mom to get me to be quiet, she would just give me a bunch of paper, and I would just sit there for hours. And then I got to high school, and I was like, yeah, I want to be an artist. And then she was like, yeah, there's this thing called money, which you won't have. So I put the arts on a back burner, but then coming here, I got the opportunity to reawaken that passion when I entered the dual degree program. And so I had never really done painting before, but just drawing. And so I learned that here. And then I went back home to Detroit and opportunities just came to pursue it. And so I was like, yeah, I want to dive in and beautify my city through my art.
Thank you. Renee?
Hi, my name is Renee Yassine. I had a really similar story to Waleed where I always wanted to pursue art and writing, but I also wanted to supplement those kind of like natural creative urges with something, some subject matter expertise. So while I was here, I majored in economics and I got the opportunity to reawaken my passion for art and communication when during the COVID-19 pandemic, I founded a startup inspired by my 10-year-old little brother that helped younger children stay physically active and conversational during the pandemic isolation. And through that, I did digital art. I was like founding a company as a young college student. And then when it failed and I was looking for, my next thing to do, I worked in the economics department here at Notre Dame as a research assistant and somehow ended up writing a column for the Post about relationships, finances, career, all the things that I had in my sort of winding path on my college journey.
Hi, everyone. My name's Conal Fagan. So I'm a 2021 grad. I am now living back in Dublin and just started recently with Arthritis Ireland. But disability has been an essential part of my life growing up. And there's three different pieces why that is. One is the photo you see on screen there. So that's myself and my fiance Maggie with a team called the Oxford Bulls. And I started working with them back in 2015. And they're a group of young adults who live with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so I first met Adam. Can't see exactly where he is there. He's on the far left. Back in 2015, he walked out with me and was actually my mascot at one of my soccer games. And we developed this relationship and became this beautiful friendship. He just turned 18 last week. It's been really cool to share this journey. But also from a personal point of view of family side as well, I have an uncle who lives with MS. And then also my father as well passed away in 2017 and he lived with Alzheimer's disease in his last couple of years too. Disability is something that has been very much central to my life. And so being able to serve in that sector, I think has been integral to who I am.
Thank you. So I loved hearing about all of that from you guys about just how you've discovered your different passions and how you've been able to pursue them throughout different parts of your life. So I want to talk about this word purpose. Today's we're talking about bringing purpose to life. When you think about purpose, what does that mean to you? And what comes to mind when you think about purpose?
Sure, I can jump
Kyle?
in.
Yeah.
I think for me, I think it's something that purpose is never a static thing. I think it's something that evolves and changes as we get older. And I think it's something that as we grow, as we learn, and as we become more educated about ourselves and the world around us, for me, it's something that it's a process of becoming and it's a process of understanding who we are and how the world around us plays into that as well. And I like to think of it as well as what gets me out of bed in the morning. It seems like a very elementary thing, but the purpose is this cultivation of really like your journey that your soul goes on. It's this mosaic that kind of unravels as you travel throughout your life. And I think purpose is, I don't think there's one singular definition of what purpose is. And I think that's the beauty of it is everyone has their own definition of it.
Thank you. Do either of you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I feel like those are pretty good.
That's a good definition. Hit it. You hit it out of the park, Connell. So, Waleed, you talked a little bit about, discovering when you were really young, this passion for art. And then I loved your mom's comment about there's money, right? And so thinking about your life growing up, what kind of models of post-college life and career did you have? And how did those models impact what you decided, how you were going to move forward? You obviously then discovered computer engineering. How did the people that you saw in your life that were doing post-life work impact how you move forward?
Honestly, I feel like I didn't have too many role models around me. So my father, he graduated from college, but he died when I was just one. So it was just my mom and I, and she was my role model, even though she didn't necessarily, she wasn't I was trying to do something different than what she did, but she was, telling me, oh, you should pursue this kind of thing and point to me to, different career opportunities. But I didn't necessarily have a person I would say I looked at until pretty much after I feel like college and specifically with art. When I returned back to Detroit, I saw a lot of art going around or coming up, specifically public installations and stuff. And I started connecting with people. And then I realized, oh, there are people actually doing this as a living. It is possible. And so I think it was pretty much later in life, almost after I got my degree and moved back to Detroit. I was like, oh, this is actually something I can pursue. So yeah, I would say mainly the artist around me. Yeah.
That's really cool. Do you guys either have examples or models from your life that you want to talk about?
I definitely do. And several of them are actually here today. I could and I will talk for a long time about all of you, but I think my first college mentor, someone that I actually met in high school, was Dr. Darshan Narvaez. And when I started working or shadowing her in her lab when I was in high school still, and then I took her class my freshman year of college. And I think watching her in her career, I think once she told me that she had 7 different careers. Like a career is an unfolding process. It's, you're constantly intuitively and creatively responding to what's happening around you. It's not so much an imposition of your will as it is a response. And I think Dr. Narvaez just taught me that very early on. And she also taught me, from my freshman year of college, we were talking about purpose and what it means. How the purpose is how you connect with the world, how you connect with other people, how you choose to do that in your life. And so I carry those lessons with me. And later in college, I had other mentors who, such as like Mary Ellen Woods, who taught me a lot about not only business, but life and also about continuing education. And that's why all of you are here in ILI anyway, is because you believe that continuing education is important. So I think my idea of purpose and my career has been shaped by people who are continuously learning and evolving and responding to the world around them.
Yeah. And I think just on that as well, I think the beauty of it as well is that it's never always the same people who are in the same industry. So one of my biggest mentors has been George A. Lopez, not the comedian. I always have to preface that. But George Lopez is a huge supporter of the ILI program. Unfortunately, couldn't be here today, but his background is economic sanctions in the UN, which is clearly in some ways not related to disability, but just that mentorship that has come along over time and asking difficult questions as well. I think particularly as a young person too, I think, the reason we're here is because we want to ask big questions, and sometimes you need that mentor who's going to be able to nourish that engagement that you can have with them and grapple with those big questions. So I think it's something there you really can find a mentor anywhere, and I think that's the beauty of it. So
Thank you. Speaking of those big questions, one of the big buzzwords in ILI we talk a lot about is this idea of discernment and thinking about how we discern, what comes next. And I think you all are a little bit familiar with it, but I'd love to just hear your perspective around what discernment means to you, and if you do that, if you feel like you discern things in your life and what that might look like, or an example. Renee, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Yeah, people always called me indecisive when I was in college. And even after college, when I was working in my research lab, I was around people who had gone to grad school and people who were professors, people who were in an academic environment. Very, in some ways, many of them were very tunnel vision, single focused. And I was very much not that way at all. They were always pressuring me. You have to figure out what you're going to do. You have to pick one thing and stick with it. You can't just keep writing your poetry and starting businesses and writing random stuff all the time. And I think I resisted that greatly because I do think there's a time and a place for like steady work on one thing. But when you're young and you don't know a lot, you don't have a lot of experience, I think a mistake that people make is choosing too strongly too early. And I didn't want to do that. And I think we don't know the results of what my choices have been yet, but I think it's worked out in a very fulfilling way for me to just feel free to wander. And I'm not wandering aimlessly or wandering without, you know, a concern for excellence or success, but I am definitely wandering. And I think that's all right and part of the process.
And I think to just build off that, obviously, the compass kind of represents ILI and what that is. And it's this point knowing that it's the journey, right? It's never a destination that you're going to end up and say, oh, I've done enough service or I've done enough in the business world or whatever it is. It's always this process of understanding and wandering into the unknown. And I think when I think about discernment, for me, it's about just taking that step and knowing that it can be, unstable, unsteady, and uncertain, but recognizing that if we don't take the step, then we're always going to ask the what if question. And I think that's something that, again, as young people, I look at decisions which I've made in my life and think about doing an unconventional or untraditional path for me is, that's an unstable step. Moving to the other side of the world is an uncertainty. But at the same time, I find the love of my life, coming to Notre Dame and moving back home and getting to be in spaces like this has been truly special. It wouldn't have happened if I didn't take the step.
Do you have anything to add about discernment?
Honestly, I would just echo the same things that they said. I think for me, the word discernment has always been interesting because of my background. I grew up in a very fundamentalist church background where discernment is this is what you hear from God. That's it. That is how you discern. And so I'm like, I don't know. Did God tell me to be an artist or no? But now I feel like I'm leaning towards what Kano was saying, like taking steps. I feel like, all right, there are things that I am passionate for or passionate about or things I want to do, and seeking out opportunities to pursue those passions. I feel like that is me discerning not only, my path in life, but more about myself and who I am. And yeah, it's just for me now, it's like a process and like a slow journey. And yeah, it can veer and go in different ways, but I feel like at the end of the day, even if I'm going on different paths, I end up with the same goal in the end. For instance, I was like, when I was younger, I really loved my city, Detroit. I would go out and pick up trash and I want to clean up the city. I want to beautify it. And now I'm doing that in a different way through art. I'm still having an impact, having people say, oh, you're making the city so much brighter, that kind of thing. But it's all heading in the same direction, just, different paths.
I love that idea of different paths. That's really interesting. So you guys represent two different generations on the stage, actually, we talked about earlier, and a very different set of generations than our ILI fellows. I want to just spend a little time talking about sort of public perception around generational differences. Are there things that are associated with your generation that you feel really resonate with you and you're like, yep, yeah, that's me. I am that. Or are there things that you feel like just are really mislabeled and they're not really hitting right or they just don't fit for you? I'd love to hear your thoughts around that because I think what we think about in generations is that the older generation can teach you all things, but there's so much we can learn from you. And so I just want to hear your thoughts around some of these ideas that we think about people and generalize around our different ages.
Yeah, I can jump in with that. I think I spoke to Father Kevin about this before, but this kind of understanding that it's like the cyclical nature of life and how things continue to re-evolve over time. And I think when we think about at some point in our life, we're going to have to be faced with these big challenges that come our way. A lot of the times we're sitting in places of uncertainty and other times we're sitting in places of comfort. But sometimes it's required that we take that step and seek that discomfort almost. And so I think that's something that as we look as young people, I think we have almost a responsibility in some way to learn and understand so that hopefully we won't make the same mistakes that other generations have made in the past, but also understand that we want to learn from that wisdom so that we can pass along. My first summer when I was here at Notre Dame, I spent some time in South Africa at a soccer academy called Ubuntu Football. And it is a soccer academy that works with kids from the townships in South Africa. But this concept of Ubuntu in the African context is about this common humanity and the I am because of who we are. And I think that we can't exist without each other. So I think there is such a shared learning that we can have with the older generation as well. So
I think for me, one thing that resonates is actually something Renee said about taking a non-traditional path. I feel like at least I see chatter of that online. Okay, millennials are, doing whatever kind of thing. But I feel like I resonate with that, not always in bold steps, but sometimes it's just little things. I was actually flashing back to because I did the Riley program here, it's a 5-year program. And so in between, after my 4th year, going into my 5th year, I had a internship offer with Chrysler, but I was like, I want to stay here and take more art classes. And I remember talking to my friend's brother, who was significantly older than him, about 30, 20 years older or something. And I'm not going to use the word he said, but it's like, this is a stupid decision, essentially. What are you doing? You can do art whenever. Go take this internship. And I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to do this, even though it's slightly non-traditional. And I feel like I've been trying to just do that in my life as well, instead of being like I think one thing, not to beat up on my mom, I'm saying a lot of things now, but she was like, essentially, like when I started my first job, this could be your only job for your life or whatever. And now just getting this idea from people I see around me of it doesn't have to be that way. Work doesn't necessarily have to be my identity. It can be, honestly, I'm using it as being able to support my purpose and pursue art, even though that's not my job. But yeah, seeing that there are different paths and taking them, even though it might look crazy to some people outside, is something that resonates with me.
So for me, the Post hired me because they wanted a Gen Z voice. They wanted to, expand their audience to get some younger and more diverse audiences reading the Post. And because of that, sometimes I feel this leaning or this inclination to lean into these generational wars. Every generation thinks that the generation after them is like shocking and crazy and oh my gosh, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And I really try to reject that in the way that I write about generational differences because there are differences, but the reality is like it's more so that the world has changed, not that the people are changing. And I think this gets back to Father Kevin's idea of things coming back into fashion in your life and in the world every 10, 20 years or so. It's really not that we are any different than as people than you were when you were in your 20s. It's that the world around us is changing and we're trying to respond and react to that together as a community intergenerationally. And I love being friends with people of other generations, people younger than me and older than me. And one of my favorite columns that I've ever written was a column on intergenerational friendship. Someone that I met here at Notre Dame, the late Dean Porter, who is the director emeritus and curator of the Innate Art Museum, we met, he was 82, I was 22 or 23, 21. Yeah. Anyway, huge, generational gap, but we were able to come together here on this campus to talk about art and to talk about how much we learned from being in an intergenerational community, multiple generations flocking to Notre Dame. And yeah, I'm on a winding thread here, but college campuses are a place where you can really meet people of different generations. And that's part of the educational experience for all of us, is not just that we're learning the information, but that we're learning from the experience of older people and they're learning from us.
It's beautiful. Waleed, you said something about your work not being your identity. And I think that would really relate and resonate with our ILI fellows because they come here because they've just ended their work. They've had this career 20, 30, 40 years, and they're trying to figure out what does this mean for me? Because I identify as a lawyer or I identify as, anything, an engineer. And you just came out and said, here you are at this age, able to say, my work is not my identity. I'd love to hear you guys talk a little bit about that. And you too, if you have more to say, just how you've come to that decision that your work doesn't have to be your identity. And what does that mean for you? How do you live that out? Because I think society would say otherwise or has pressures otherwise. I just would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I want to touch on something Bernie had mentioned yesterday with this conversation with Tom and talking about this piece of, where do we find ourselves? What are our values that we really think about? And I think that for me is something like faith is a huge part of who I am and having that at the core of what I represent. And personal example, as you all know, as Emily mentioned, I was the leprechaun when I was here. A lot of really cool experiences with that. So I did that for actually 2.5 years while I was here. And I would grappled with this throughout my whole time because people knew me as, oh, you're the leprechaun, and then proceeded to tell me about all the times they've been in Ireland, all the places that they have visited, which was great. And I loved it. But I think it was something that's why I became known. And that's what people saw at the surface level. But throughout all of that, I really struggled with my mental health. I really struggled in the class. And there were different aspects of my life that people didn't necessarily see. And for me, I had to make that decision, again, taking that step. I said, actually, you know what, for the second half of senior year, I'm not going to do this because one, people only recognize me in that way. But then two as well, it's like, I need to reprioritize in the way that suits me best. So I think it comes back to values and where you see your worth and recognizing that your job doesn't define you. So
Yeah, I think it's also about recognizing discomfort when you're in the wrong place. It's hard to, when you get in a routine, maybe you're at a job that you don't like and you are trying to have a life outside of that job, but everything's spilling over the negative energy from that job that you don't like. I think it's easy for someone or people like us who have fun jobs that we really love to tell people about, your job is not your life when so much of our creative energy, our, relationships are integrated with our work and like in a positive way. But I think the harder question is for many, for many people who are in jobs that they don't really like, how can you recognize that your job is not your life when you might not have the time after work to pursue your passions or the time or the energy after work to do that kind of thing? And I don't really have an answer. I think it's actually like something that I've struggled with to, not make my job my life, even when my job is not fun. I don't have a good answer, but it's something I'm still actually trying to figure out.
can I just bounce back something really quick as well? I think the word struggle is really important because speaking to some of our ILI fellows, I think struggle is a guarantee in some way. Struggle is going to come at different points in our life. And I actually just think about Abraham in the Bible, right? He was 75 before he got his call from God. And I think that's the piece. It's never going to be a linear path. It's never going to be straightforward. But I think within that, to Renee's point, is like when you have a support network around you that is able to help you through that and accompany you through that process, I think it makes things a whole lot easier than it could be if you were flying by yourself, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think we've talked a lot about discomfort, and I love that you guys keep coming back to that discomfort or, seeking discomfort or being in situations that are challenging. I think when we hear you all talking about how much intentionality you're approaching your life with, I know that's inspiring to me, but I also recognize it's not easy, right? So we've talked about these times where it's hard to maybe really pursue the thing that you know deep down is right. And you guys are all doing that. So can you just share an example of a time when maybe you had a doubt or concern about what you were doing and how did you navigate that? Like, how did you decide the right path forward and where did you go from there? I'd love to hear a little more about that.
So this recently happened to me. I graduated in 22. I think in my nervous intro, I neglected to mention that. And I started working in a research lab at Notre Dame because I was trying to figure out if I wanted to get a PhD in economics. And you know, I was doing the work and I was trying to convince myself to want to get a PhD because so many of the people that I admired, my professors, other grad students in the department, that's what they did. And I loved them and wanted to be like them. So I kept trying to convince myself that this is the right place for me. This is what I wanted to do. I kept, you know, plugging away in those giant spreadsheets with millions of data observations when all I really wanted to do was be like writing and making music and stuff. And I had so many conversations with my professors and I was almost, they kept telling me like, Renee, it seems like you don't like this. And I'd be like, no, I really do like this. This is what I want to do because I didn't want to disappoint them. And that kind of made it harder. I think when you're young, you don't want to disappoint the people that are mentoring you and the people that love you. So you might force yourself to like something that you don't actually like, or force yourself to do something you don't actually want to do and just swallow it and say that's life. And so that's what I was dealing with in the year after graduation. And I was very lucky that I did not stop pursuing my passions outside of work. I would work, 9 to 5, and then I would go home and start like writing my novel. And sometimes my professors would be like, Renee, I think this writing thing that you're doing outside is maybe like affecting your work a little bit. Maybe you shouldn't do that. But I kept doing it anyway. And so when someone, my best friend, sent me this job posting at the Post, I was ready because I had already been writing. I had already been creating a portfolio outside of work, even if, there was that natural urge that I wasn't listening to. I was trying to suppress it. So I think to wrap it up, I think the whole point of this is to get better at listening to those innate urges that you have, those things that are pulling you, and to listen less to the, examples of who you think you should be that based on what other people are doing, and really just be more introspective and trust that your intuition is going to tell you what you're supposed to be doing.
And I think for our generation, I think social media obviously has become a huge part of our lives and there's no escaping it in some way. But it's like, how do you block out the noise and find that silence and being able to hear that voice, I think is really important. Similar to Renee, I did not like economics. I actually took principles of microecon senior spring, which was a social science requirement, which if I hadn't passed, I wouldn't have graduated. Terrible decision. But the reason I took it was because I was looking at grad school at the time for global affairs, and every single program was like, you need a stats background or an econ background. And I did it because that's what it was telling me to do. But I was miserable in that class. And my birthday was always around finals time. So I was like, my last exam at Notre Dame on my birthday is a micro-econ exam. Shout out to all the econ people out there. But I think, again, it was like listening to that noise. And then I just completed my master's in disability studies. And I'm like, that process was a whole lot more enjoyable because I was following that voice.
Yeah. Renee said something about pursuing your passion outside of your work, which you were doing. Well, you're doing that all the time.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about, again, I'm sure that there's been doubts along the way. How have you made that? How do you make the time? How do you make it a priority to continue pursuing that? What's driving you in that? And how do you do that?
It's a great question. I feel like definitely I can't necessarily point to one instance of, oh, this was like, I was frustrated. It's like a continual up and down. I think it was easy for me to get my first art show. I essentially walked up to a store where a lady was doing a rotating artist showcase. And I was like, oh yeah, I do art. And then I showed her some pictures and she's, do you want to be in the next show? I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I guess this art thing isn't that bad, And then I sold one piece there. So I'm like, oh yeah, I got this. Then, fast forward a couple of years, I applied for this thing and I got rejected. I applied for this thing, this mural thing didn't work out, just a string of disappointments. And so then I was thinking, maybe if other people aren't seeing value in what I'm doing, then maybe this isn't my purpose, back to the discernment question. But I think ultimately I was like, if I don't get any acknowledgement or anything like that, or get the opportunities I want, I still enjoy painting. And I still feel like I was already in a place in my life before, like in high school and college, where I suppressed that passion. And then once I entered the dual degree program and kind of unlocked it again, I was like, I don't want to go back to that. So that was like the North Star, like leading force for me, just, okay, I know this is something I want and yeah, I'm going to continue it. But then I guess finding the time is just, shout out to my wife over there and our baby. That has added a whole nother dimension to it. But I would say having support like that has definitely, it's not possible without support like that. And then early on, It was just honestly, it's probably not good to say, but sometimes I would just go to work just tired because I stayed up all night painting, and then I'm like, all right, I still got to go to work. So it was a little bit of struggle or sacrifice, but also having support around me and ultimately remembering why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's really great. It's inspiring to hear, honestly. Losing sleep reminds me a little bit of maybe when I think we talk a little bit in ILI too about flow and finding flow. And I imagine that in those late nights when you probably would have also liked to be sleeping, you were in this state of flow where it didn't feel like time was actually passing.
Yeah.
Does that resonate at all?
No, definitely.
Yeah.
Like when I'm in the flow with painting, I will just keep going and then, I'll stop and look at the time and then it's like reality hits. I'm like, oh wait, I didn't eat for 3 hours. I have to go to the bathroom. I left my clothes in the laundry, all this stuff. But yeah, that has definitely helped.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I'm sure that the folks that are sitting here would love to have the opportunity to ask you all some questions. So I'm going to open it up. If you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand and wait for the mic to come to you. If you want to direct I'd love to get, one question per person if we have them out there. So try to direct your question to either all of them or one in particular. Either way is fine. Does anyone have a question?
Waleed, I'm really impressed by the mural that's on the wall here. Would you describe to us how many, ladders and platforms you had to have to do that and how high that is, please? The process.
And also, where in Detroit is that? I'm a native
Yeah, I saw you
Detroiter.
raise your hand. Okay. It's on Mack and Van Dyke, so on the east side. Thankfully, no ladders because painting on ladders is rough. But I used a scissor lift. And so the highest point of that, like where the ball is about 60 feet, but the head is, I think, tops out around 45 or something like that. Yeah, giant scissor lift that could go up to, I don't know, 70 feet, something like that. And just, yeah, going up and down. And that is a little bit easier because I put a wooden tray in there to hold my paints as opposed to a ladder like going up. And, I'm also really clumsy. So if I was on a ladder, I don't think my wife would approve. It took about a month. Yeah, a month I had some help for some time, like an assistant. And basically, after I was done with work, just go there, work until sunset, and then took a week or so off of work where I'm just like 14-hour days or something like that. Just, yeah.
I have a question. When I was your age, I never thought about what it would be like to be my age now. Do you ever think about what your life will be like 30, 40, 50 years from now? And can you envision it?
I'll jump in with this one first. There is a great series on Netflix called Blue Zones. Don't know if any of you have watched it, heard about it. I think for me, that's opened up the prospect of what it means to live a fulfilled life and understanding that it's not just that we want to live longer, it's that our quality of life wants to be better as well. So I think for me, it's almost like, what are the foundations I can put in place now that are going to serve me well in the long run? And for the people in this room, I was saying to Emily, it was really funny yesterday when you came in to listen to Bernie and all the alumni came back and are looking for their friends. And I think that's the beautiful part of it. It's like having that support system in place. It really does make a difference. So that for me speaks to setting the foundations now for it.
Next.
Yeah.
This is for Renee. So good. You mentioned the whole generational thing and intergenerational thing. I recently stumbled on a book called The Perennials, which is basically a position that says, stop talking about generational differences and think about intergenerational work. And I was also struck by your comment about the fact that the university is a particularly fertile place for that to happen. Can you talk a little bit more about how that broke for you at Notre Dame and how you see that happening in a university setting?
Absolutely. And not to plug, but I did write about this in the column about specifically why college campuses remain a home for people many years, even decades after they graduate. So I think that a university, especially one like this university, with a very strong sense of identity, a faith identity, a community kind of focus, we really are steeped in this idea that as Notre Dame, we're one being, we're one force for good. When you think about yourself as an individual, you're so small, it's really hard to think about yourself making any sort of difference in the world. And I think it can be very not only isolating, but just defeating to just constantly be thinking I'm different, I'm alone, all of this. And in a university setting, I think you're taught, you grow acclimated to the fact that there are learners of all ages trying to reach the same kinds of goals together. And structurally, even like a university has events where people can mingle freely. A university is like, there's this concept of a third space where it's a place that's not work and not home that you can go to just mingle with people. And I think that's one reason why universities are just centers, especially in the US today, centers of connection and incubators for ideas, because you have people who have years of experience coming together with people who have lots of energy, no experience. And then you have everything. It's a complete ecosystem. And it's the perfect place to start new things. And I think all of us had our seeds planted here for the things that we're doing now. They began 5, 6, 7 years ago. Sorry. um, and yeah, I'm getting a little off topic here, but I do think that's a very interesting concept that we should just stop seeing the divisions, because when you see divisions, you just weaken every generation. When you think we're different than you, you're different than us, and we'll never have your strengths. Let's stop with that, you know?
Hey, this is a follow-up on that. One of and I'm from the third cohort, and some of the folks in my cohort know that one of the things that I did a little research on and I felt strongly about for my year here was that I thought that one of the secrets of this program, the secret sauce as I called it at the time, was this intergenerational impact. And in our readings at the time, in our core class, we read Richard Rohr, and one of the things I think he said was that he found that in his experience that older people often felt that they were boring younger people, and that younger people thought they had nothing to say to older people other than technology questions. And I have found since I've left, I've observed that. And I do find people my age, while they initially will talk to somebody younger, I think they find young people a little intimidating. And I'm not sure I fully understand why. But I do believe it's the secret, one of the secrets of this program. So I wonder if any of you can comment on what from your side, and anything that I guess that I could advise or gently advise my friends when they seem like they talk to a younger person for 5 minutes, ask where they're from, what they're doing, and then, they feel like they're going to bore them. They don't want to talk to them anymore.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we read the same book, if it's Falling Forward, Second Half of Life, it's that kind of concept. I've read it, great book. I think for me, I think it's all about authenticity. I think that's something that, and I mentioned some of this to the prospects yesterday, about this concept of having authentic conversations with people, because I do think that's something that we're so used to messaging people really quickly, or a quick FaceTime or Snapchat or whatever. And I think that can sometimes make a huge difference. And I think go beyond what does a person's LinkedIn bio say or whatever it is. And then the second part of that as well is like also seeing things not as a transactional relationship, but something that is going to continue to cultivate and foster over time in a way that is going to be mutually beneficial. And it's not saying they have to, be a mentor, friendship, whatever it is. It could just be that listening ear. And I always say this, that God will give you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You learn a lot more when you listen. And so that for me is where I see it.
Hi, over here. In the terms of generational differences, I would say that especially this year, as I've interacted with so many people on campus, your generation gives me hope. So I just take that with you and your friends. And then a question for the three of you. And Renee, I wrote down 3 or 4 things you said. I find you just have a lot of perspective for your age. What do you attribute it to?
That's very flattering. Thank you. I think I gotta say, I had a great family upbringing. And I think this sort of gets to the previous question too. I feel very strongly about leaning into families as a source of intergenerational exchange and as a place to practice that. And, if you're looking for ways to better connect with young people, start with your kids and grandkids and have them start with you. I think the conflicts that you will run into will be more easily weathered when you have that relationship already. And it teaches you so much about talking to my parents, and I were always very, very communicative, very honest with each other. They would definitely tell me if they thought I was doing something wrong. They did not mince words. They didn't try to, protect my feelings sometimes, but it was out of love. And it was out of that, you need to learn how to listen just as we learn how to listen to you. And so I think was for me the foundation of like where I get a lot of my ideas. And every time I write a column, my editor probably knows this. Every time I write a column, I read it on the phone to my mom. And I'm like, Mom, what do you think about? And I'm very lucky to have that. And I don't think it's a weakness at all to lean on family, to lean on older people. I think that's what we're meant to do. And in our hyper individualist culture, we see it as a sign of weakness. And I think that's something that it's changing. And I'm very glad to see it change. I don't know if that answered your question, but for me, it's family.
Yeah, I think for me, again, like family is a huge part of it. And I think compassion is the big thing for me. I think like even with my father's example, like growing up as somebody who was a caregiver for my dad, I think that's something that really does teach you how to become more humble and humility. And I think that is something like, I remember one of my coaches told me when I was 12, he was like, your ego's too big. And I said, what's an ego? But still to this day, that's something for me when I look at it, it's like, it's the opposite of that. It's the compassion, it's the empathy that has allowed me to become more substantive as a person and actually more, I hope, more interesting, and really being able to go deeper beyond the surface. So compassion and empathy, I would say, are two big things.
I think for me, I echo what Renee is saying, but not like my actual family. It's more of like my acquired family or assembled family. I don't know, friends, people who, a lot of them who I met here, I feel like I got to cultivate a diverse group of people, friends. And so I feel like that has informed my perspective. That's made me more empathetic or think about things that I had never thought about before. So I think, yeah, for me, that has contributed greatly to any insight or anything that I have.
So I have a follow-on question slash comment slash questions. As a guest here for the last day and a half, I've just been struck by the power of the relationships that I've seen among the current cohorts, previous cohorts, and just the power and the authenticity of those relationships. And this morning at breakfast, we were talking a little bit about the fact that the knowledge worker is a term that's been around for decades. We all know what a knowledge worker is. And there's a relatively new term out there now called the wisdom worker. And it really refers to our generation, those of us that have been in the workforce for decades. We have experience and we have wisdom. It strikes me that the three of you have wisdom beyond your years. And so my question is, A, are you aware of that? And B, are you prepared to grab that wisdom by the horn and be a force for good with your wisdom?
Now I'm a little scared.
Yeah.
I'm going to let someone else answer the
But
question.
he's a podcaster, so he has to ask tough questions. I think for me, I honestly think in some ways, one of the biggest challenges is also encouraging other people our age to think about these things as well, because we're very blessed that we now have this network where we're able to find other people who are driven to talk about purpose and go on this journey. But what about the people who haven't got there yet? And Bernie, you mentioned yesterday about the U curve and thinking about at 18, you're really happy or fulfilled, and then slightly downhill till 47.2 years, and then it's back up again. So it's thinking about how can we almost be in a position where it's this shared learning environment that we don't have a U curve, that we have, one that is potentially going to become increasing over time. So I think it's a challenge as well for us to also bring other people with us on this journey. So yeah, that's what I would say on that.
So you just reminded me, like when you're on a plane, they always tell you like put your own mask on first and then you help other people. I think in my career, I've been thinking about it a lot like that. Let me use the resources and the mentorship and the love that I have gotten from my family, from Notre Dame, and let me funnel that into myself to develop my skills, my passions right now. But now, now that I've seen a little bit of the fruits of that, I think, my career's not done. I literally just started. So I'm like, how can I now do something that is not only fun and a use of my talents and passions, but is good for other people and good for the world? And I think that's a question that if you start thinking about it too early, if you start thinking, I want to change the world, like before you've developed your own skills, you might just feel like you might just get lost in the sea of like how difficult that is. Yeah, I'm putting my oxygen mask on for myself right now, and I'm already thinking about like how I can use those skills for the good of other people.
Yeah, I think. Oh, is there not?
No, no, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, yeah, for me, it's still, I would say I'm still on the journey in the process of that. I feel like for the longest, I didn't really think I had anything to offer or anything like wisdom wise to tell people. I'm just like, oh, I'm just doing what I want to do. But gradually, I feel like, after, more and more people asking me, I'm like, okay, I guess there is something. I perhaps don't have I can't change your life, but I can tell you what worked for me. And if you have similar interests or things, I am happy to help and share all that I know. So I feel like that's where I'm at. And I'm, yeah, just growing along that path.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. You got one? Okay, thanks.
I find your discussions extremely interesting on the two extremes of what you have to do and what your passion or your flow is. And so for that, I have a particular question for Renee. As you've described very nicely what you had to learn in economics and what you did afterwards in economics, and then you described what you loved to do, which was writing fiction. I'd like to hear how you put those together and understand, what do I read when I read the Post, when I read your column? Fact, fiction.
Oh, yeah. So I did an interview a while back where this guy was interviewing me about my writing when I first started writing for the Post. And he was like, it's very clear to me that you're a nerd from your writing. You use a lot of data and stats. And that was, something I learned as an econ person. I was constantly trying to translate research and help my professors express statistical results in words. And I bring a lot of that to my column writing. But this is my craft, and what I, am working towards and trying really hard to do is more so what I do in fiction, which is how do you connect with people when you can't see them and they can't see you? And how do you make them feel things when you can't see them and they can't see you? And so I try to bring those two things together when I write my columns. And also, I will say, when I was a student at Notre Dame, I often felt like people would ask me why I majored in economics, expecting me to love economics. And economics is great, but I often felt like if I didn't have economics to run away from, I wouldn't have done all the interesting things that I did. And I think actually, I advise people to take on a major that challenges them and that they might not actually be super passionate about, because it's that cross-functional expertise that will fuel your actual passion. My econ background fuels the way that I write and fuels the way that I communicate with other people. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. I know we'll have some time for you all to ask your other questions. There's so many out here. You guys are wonderful. I want to just give you each a brief moment to just say if you have any final word or last thing that you want to share with everyone before we wrap today. So do you guys have one last thing you feel like you didn't get out?
I think for me, the big thing is just taking the step. I know I mentioned it earlier, but I think the process of discernment and discovery, it's a continual process. And I know that sounds cliche, but what's the worst that could happen, I guess, just say yes. And honestly, and I would also say smile as well. I think in recent times, I just started smiling more, not like in a weird way at people, but like in a way that is just like, just having a zeal for life and really being open to the possibilities. And I think serendipity really can come in any way, shape, or form. So just embrace it all.
I guess I already touched on this, but I would just say, don't suppress the part of yourself that whatever that passion is, because you will regret it, I feel like, in the end. And on that same note, don't let failure or any potential setback discourage you from continuing to pursue that.
I just want to say thank you. When I see rooms like this filled with older people who are just like so eager to learn from younger people, I feel like I wish that I could ask all of you my questions. But so yeah, it's heartening to know that older people are so interested in the lives of younger people. And it is that interest and that love that has allowed us to start flourishing and start, our paths on the right foot. Thank you.
And I just want to say again, heartfelt thank you to all three of you for being with us, for sharing, for your vulnerability, for your wisdom. You are wise beyond your years. I know I'm walking away with a lot to think about and having learned a lot, and I know everyone else here has too. So thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it. I invite those who are watching the recording of this event to learn more about future installments of Inspiring Conversations or about the ILI program by visiting our website, ili.nd.edu. And thanks for tuning in today. Thank you.